Chapter 4. As soon as the sun had set, the defenders gathered on the walls. Fires had already been lighted there, and cauldrons of water and pitch suspended over them, and sacks of quicklime placed in readiness to be emptied. Great piles of stone were placed at short intervals. "As long as they attack at only one or two places," Sir Eustace said to his wife, "I am quite confident that we shall repulse them. If they attack at a dozen, they may succeed, as we should only have a couple of archers and 6 or 7 men at arms at each point, besides a score or so of the vassals. I have no doubt that these will fight stoutly, for the sight of their burning homes has roused them, and each man is longing to get a blow at those who have wrought them so much damage. Still, 30 men are but a small party to beat back an assault by hundreds. However, if they carry the outside wall, they will have the second to deal with, and there we shall stand much thicker together, and they cannot attack from many points, while if we are driven into the keep we shall be stronger still. Have you seen that the women and children are ready to retire into the keep as soon as the assault begins?" "I have been round myself and given orders," Dame Margaret said. "I have told them that the inner gate will be closed as soon as fighting begins, and that those who do not come in before that must remain outside, or else mount to the walls and cross the bridges, for that on no account will the gates be opened again." "That is well, Margaret. I am now about to station 2 men at arms on the inner wall at the end of each of the 3 bridges, so that they may be ready on an instant to turn the catches and let the bridges fall behind our men as they rush across. Our tenants have already driven as many more of their best horses and cattle into the inner court as can find standing room, so that their loss may be as small as possible. If the outer wall is carried, I have no great fear that the second wall will be taken. The plunderers who form the mass of Sir Clugnet's force will have had enough, and more than enough, of fighting by the time they capture the outer one. Whatever happens, do not show yourself on the walls tonight, and see that the children do not leave their beds. You can do naught, and will see but little in the dark. Tomorrow morning, wife, I will leave you free to go among the soldiers, and give them encouragement as may be needed, but for tonight I pray you stir not out. I will send Henry from time to time to let you know how matters go." Rapidly the men gathered on the walls. Each had had his post assigned to him, and when Sir Eustace made a tour of inspection, he was glad to see how confidently each man bore himself, and how well prepared to give the enemy a warm reception. As soon as it became dark, the outer work on the other side of the moat was abandoned, the defenders called into the castle, and the drawbridge raised, for it was evident to Sir Eustace that, although it might be maintained in daylight by the aid of the archers on the wall, it could not resist an attack by overwhelming numbers when deprived of that assistance. Sir Eustace, after inspecting the men's arms, ordered all those on the walls, with the exception of a few who were to remain on watch, to sit down with their backs against the battlement and to maintain an absolute silence. "It is by sound rather than sight that we shall be able to judge of their movements," he said. "All sitting down may sleep, if it so pleases them, till they are roused." The sentries were 10 in number, and were all taken from among the archers. Most of these men had been accustomed to the chase, were skilled in woodcraft, and accustomed to listen to the slightest noises that might tell of the movement of a stag and enable them to judge his position. Sir Eustace for the present posted himself in his old position over the gate. Jean Bouvard and Guy were with him, while Long Tom moved round and round the walls to gather news from his sentries. Sometimes Guy accompanied him. "They are moving," Tom the archer said, as he stood listening intently on the wall at the rear of the castle. "It's an hour past sundown, and about the time the knaves will be mustering if they intend to make a regular attack on us. If it had been only an escalade there would have been no sound till early morning. I thought I heard them on the other side, but I am sure of it now." "I can hear singing up at their camp, but I can't hear anything else." "They are keeping that up to deceive us, I expect; but besides the singing there is a sort of a rustle. I don't think that they are coming this way at present, or we should hear it plainer. It seems to me that it is spreading all around." "I'll go back and tell Sir Eustace what you think, Tom." Guy hurried back to the other side of the castle. "Long Tom thinks, Sir Eustace, that he can hear a stir all around." "We have noticed it too, at least all round this side. Tell him not to call the men to their feet until the enemy approaches more closely. I believe that it is the march of a large number of men, and that they are probably moving to the positions assigned to them, but it may be another hour or two before they close in." In a short time the sound became more distinct. From a rustle it rose to a deep confused murmur, then an occasional clink as of arms striking armour became audible. Most of the men on the walls were now on their feet gazing into the darkness. Presently the sound ceased, first on one side and then on the other. "I fancy they are all at their stations now, Jean Bouvard. We shall soon hear more of them. Do not let your archers shoot, Tom, until they can make them out very distinctly. We may be sure that they will come up with their mantlets, and it would be a waste of arrows to loose them until they are close to the moat. But of course, if separate figures can be distinguished, your men will draw on them." In a quarter of an hour messengers came from various points on the wall, saying that there was something moving within sight, and to those at the post over the gate a dark confused mass like a shadow seemed to be slowly coming down towards their outwork. "Touch off the guns, Jean," Sir Eustace said. "We shall get no farther chance of catching them in a body." The captain stooped, lit 2 touch fires at the lantern standing in readiness, gave one to a man at arms, and went with the other to a cannon. Both the guns had been filled to the muzzle with bits of iron and nails, and had been laid to bear on the slope beyond the outwork. They were fired almost simultaneously, and the sound was followed by yells of pain and dismay. The besiegers, seeing that there was nothing further to gain by concealment, burst into a shout that ran all round the castle, and were answered by one of defiance from the walls. The sound was succeeded by loud orders from the leaders of the various assaulting parties, and the objects before but dimly seen now approached the walls rapidly. Jean Bouvard hurried away to superintend the defence of the other parts. "You may as well go the other way, Guy, and let me know from time to time how things are getting on. Henry, run down to your mother and tell her that the enemy are moving up the moat, and that it will be some time before there is any hard fighting. Then come back here again." It was easier to see from the side walls than it had been in front, for in front there was a glow in the sky from the number of fires burning beyond the crest of the slope, and Guy was able to make out what seemed to him a wall extending some 15 yards near the edge of the moat. The archers and crossbowmen gathered opposite to it had just begun to shoot. Behind this wall there were other dark masses irregularly placed, and extending back as far as he could see. An occasional cry told that the arrows were doing execution upon the unseen assailants behind the mantlets, and soon the blows of crossbow bolts against the wall and the sharp tap of arrows told that the enemy had also betaken themselves to their arms. A number of giant torches had been prepared, consisting of sheafs of straw soaked with pitch, and one of these was now lighted and elevated on a pole some 15 feet above the battlement. Its light was sufficient to enable the scene beyond to be clearly made out. A row of mantlets some 8 feet high had been placed by the moat, and others of the same height and 7 or 8 feet long elevated at short intervals behind these, and were so placed as to afford shelter to the men coming down to the mantlets in front. They stood in 2 lines. They were some 20 feet apart, but those in one line alternated with those in the other. Guy soon saw the object of this arrangement. Men were darting to and fro across the interval some 6 feet wide between the 2 lines. Thus they had but 10 feet to run from the shelter of one side to that on the other, and exposed themselves but for an instant to the aim of the archers. Some of the men carried great bundles of faggots, others had sacks on their shoulders. "Do not heed the mantlets in front," said Dickon, who was in command of the 6 archers near Guy, "but pick off those fellows as they come down. Shoot in turn, it's no use wasting 2 arrows on one man. Don't loose your shaft until a man is within 3 mantlets from the end, then if one misses the next can take him when he runs across the next one. That's right, Hal," he broke off as an arrow sped and a man with a sack on his shoulder rolled over. "Now, lads, we ought not to miss them by this light." 11 men fell out of the next 12 who attempted to carry their burdens down. Guy went back to Sir Eustace with the news of the manner in which the attack was being carried on, and of the effect of the archers' defence. "I have just heard the same from the other side. There is 1 attack on each side and 2 behind. Jean Bouvard has been posted there. I am going round myself now. I do not think there will be an attack made in front. I have sent the archers here to the rear, where they will be more useful. The fellows in the outwork across there have enough to do to shelter themselves." This Guy could well understand, for although the gun could not be depressed sufficiently to fire down into the tete de pont, the mangonels were hurling stones into it, and the men-at-arms shooting crossbow quarrels whenever a man showed himself. The rear of the outwork was open, and afforded no shelter to those who had taken possession of it, and already the greater portion had retired to the other side of the small moat surrounding it, where they lay sheltered by the outwork itself. It was not long before the assailants at the other points, finding that the plan they had formed was defeated by the skill of the archers, poured down in a mass between the two lines of mantlets, each man carrying his burden before him, thus sheltering him to a great extent. Against this method of attack the archers could do little, and now confined themselves to shooting at the men who, having thrown down the fascines or sacks by the edge of the moat, stood for a moment and hesitated before running back to the shelter of the mantlets, and not one in three got off scot-free. Guy, on going round the wall, found the same state of affairs at each of the other 3 points of assault. Numbers of the enemy were falling, but great piles of materials were accumulating at the edge of the moat. After a time a number of knights and men-at-arms, fully protected by armour, came down and began to hurl the sacks and bags into the moat, their operations being covered as much as possible by a storm of missiles shot through holes in the mantlets. In a short time Sir Eustace ordered the archers to desist shooting, for they were obliged, in order to aim at those so much below them, to expose a considerable portion of their bodies, and 3 were killed by the enemy's missiles. "We can't prevent them from filling up the moat," Sir Eustace said, "and it is but throwing away life to try to do so." The archers were accordingly placed in the projecting turrets, where, without being themselves exposed, they could shoot through the loopholes at any point on the face of the walls. It was not long before the moat was bridged at all 4 points of attack. Ladders were then brought down. This the assailants were able to accomplish without loss, as, instead of carrying them, they were pushed backwards and forwards by men stationed behind the mantlets, and were so zigzagged down to the moat without the defenders being able to offer any opposition. Then rushes were made of parties of knights, the ladders were placed, and the fight began in earnest. In the great courtyard the leader of the English men-at-arms was placed with 12 of his men as a reserve. They were to be summoned by 1, 2, 3, or 4 blasts of a horn to the point at which their services were most required. The assaults were obstinate, but the walls were as stoutly defended. Sometimes the ladders were hurled back by poles with an iron fork at the end. Buckets of boiling water and tar were poured over onto the assailants as they clambered up, and lime cast over on those waiting to take their turns to ascend, while with spear, axe, and mace the men-at-arms and tenants met the assailants as they endeavoured to get a footing on the wall. Guy had placed himself with the party to which he had first gone, and, taking a pike from a fallen man, was fighting stoutly. The archers from their turrets kept up a constant flight of arrows on the crowd below. Only once was the horn sounded for the aid of the reserve. Sir Eustace had taken the command at the rear, while Jean Bouvard headed the defence on the side opposite to that at which Guy was fighting. The defenders under Sir Eustace had the hardest work to hold their own, being assaulted at 2 points. This was evidently the main place of attack, for here Sir Clugnet himself and several of his knights led the assault, and at one time succeeded in gaining a footing on the wall at one point, while Sir Eustace was at the other. Then the knight blew his horn, and at the same time called the archers from the turret nearest to him, while some of the other party on the wall rushed to aid him of their own accord, and, pressing through the tenants, opposed themselves to the knights and men-at-arms who had obtained a footing on the wall. Their strength, and the power with which they wielded their heavy axes, so held the assailants in check that they could not gain space sufficient for others to join them, and when the reserve ran up, so fierce an attack was made upon the knights that several were beaten down and the rest forced to spring over the wall at the risk of life and limb. Sir Clugnet himself was the last to do this, and was carried away insensible. 2 or 3 of his companions were killed by the fall, but the rest, leaping far enough out to alight beyond the solid ground at the foot of the walls, had their fall broken by the yielding mass of materials by which they had crossed the moat. A loud shout of triumph rose from the defenders, and was re-echoed by shouts from the other walls. As soon as the news of the repulse at the rear reached the other parties, and that Sir Clugnet was badly hurt, while several of the knights were killed, the assault ceased at once, and the Orleanists withdrew, followed by derisive cries from the defenders. "Thanks be to the saints that it is all over," Sir Eustace said, as he opened his visor. "It was a close thing here, and for a time I feared that the outer wall was lost. However, I think that there is an end of it now, and by morning we shall find that they have moved off. They must have suffered very heavily. Certainly 300 or 400 must have fallen, for we must admit that they fought stoutly. You have all done well, my friends, and I thank you heartily. Now the first thing is to fetch the wounded down to the hall prepared for them. Father Gregory has all in readiness for them there. Guy, go round and find out who have fallen, and see them carried reverently down to the courtyard, and send me a list of their names, and place 2 men-at-arms at each point where the assault took place. Tom, do you similarly dispose 8 of your archers, so that, should they send a spy up to see if we sleep, a message can be sent back in the shape of a cloth yard shaft. Bid all the tenants and retainers leave the wall. A horn will recall them should there be need. I will myself visit them shortly, and thank them for their stout defence. I'll send round a cup of spiced wine to each man on the wall as soon as it can be prepared, to that all may slake their thirst after their efforts." Sir Eustace then made his way down from the wall to his apartments, where Dame Margaret was awaiting him. She hurried to meet him. "Wait, wife, till I have removed my helmet, and even then you must be careful how you embrace me, for methinks there is more than one blood stain on my armour, though happily not of mine own. All has gone well, love, and methinks that we shall hear no more of them, but they fought more stoutly than I had given them credit for, seeing that they were but a mixed rabble, and with a small proportion of real men at arms among them. I suppose Henry brought you my message to close the inner gates, as they had gained a footing on the walls." "No, I received no message since the one he brought me half an hour ago, saying that all was going well, and I thought that he was with you. Where can he be, Eustace?" she asked anxiously. "I know not, Margaret, but will search at once. While I do so, will you go to the hall that you have prepared for the wounded, and give what aid you can there? Do not fear for the boy. He turned and ran off when I spoke to him, and as his head reaches not to the top of the battlements, no harm can have befallen him, though in truth I cannot think what can have delayed him." Sir Eustace called to 2 or 3 of the men below to take torches, and to accompany him at once, and sent others to the sheds to ask if he had been seen there, then went up to the top of the inner wall and crossed the bridge at the back. "Have any of you seen aught of my son Henry?" he asked the men there. "No, my lord," one said in reply. "I marked him by our side just before the French got a footing on the other end of the wall, but I saw him not afterwards." "He ran towards the steps at the corner there," Sir Eustace said, "with a message from me that the inner doors were to be closed. Come along, men," he said to those with torches, and going to the corner of the wall descended the steps, which were steep and narrow. He took a torch from one of the men and held it over his head. As he neared the bottom he gave a low cry and ran down the last few steps, where, lying at the bottom, was the form of his son. He was stretched at full length, and there was a terrible gash on his forehead. The knight knelt beside him and raised his head, from which the steel cap had fallen. There was a deep stain of blood on the pavement beneath. He placed his hand on the boy's heart and his ear to his lips, and the men with the torches stood silently round. It was but too evident what had happened. In his haste to carry the message, Henry's foot had slipped, and he had fallen head foremost down the steep steps, his head coming in contact with the edge of one of them. Without a word, Sir Eustace raised the boy gently in his arms. His face was sufficient to tell the men the news. Their young lord was dead. Sir Eustace carried him through the inner gate and up to the boy's own room, and laid him down on his bed. Then silently he went out again and crossed the court to the keep. Dame Margaret was seeing to the wounded being laid on the straw in the lower room, and did not notice him until he touched her. She turned sharply round. His face was sufficient to tell her the truth. She gave a low cry and stepped back a pace, and he moved forward and drew her to him. "Love," he said tenderly, "God has taken him. He was fitter for heaven than any of us. He was too gentle for this rough world of ours. We shall mourn for him, but with him it is well." Dame Margaret laid her head on his shoulder and burst into a passion of tears. Sir Eustace let her weep for a time. Then he whispered, "You must be brave, my love. There will be other mourners here for their dear ones who have died fighting for us. They will need your comfort. The Villeroy could not die better than doing his duty. It was not by man's hand that he fell, but God took him. His foot slipped in running down the stair from the wall, and he must assuredly have died without a pang. Take the priest with you. I'll see to the wounded here. Father Gregory," he went on, raising his voice, "Dame Margaret has more need of you at the present moment than have these brave fellows. A grievous misfortune has befallen us. My son is dead. He fell while doing his duty. Do you take her to his room. I give her to your charge for the present. I have my work to do, and will see that your patients are well cared for." There was a murmur of surprise and regret from the wounded and those who had brought them in. The poor lad had been a general favourite in the castle for his gentle and pleasant ways withal, though many a time the rough soldiers had said among themselves, "'Tis a pity that he was not a girl, and the Lady Agnes a boy. He is more fit for a priest than for a baron at times like these, for assuredly he will never grow into a stout man at arms like his father. That a soldier should have been killed in such a fight was to be expected, but that a gentle boy like this should have fallen seemed strange and unnatural, and all sorrowed for him as well as for their lord and lady, and the men forgot for a time the smart of their wounds in their regret at his untimely death. Sir Eustace went about his work quietly and earnestly, bound up the soldiers' wounds, and saw as far as might be to their comfort. Their number was not large, as it was only in the fight on the wall that aught save their heads had been exposed, and those struck by crossbow bolts had for the most part fallen as they stood. The 8 men brought in had without exception received wounds from the swords of the French knights, and though some of the gashes were broad and deep, none of them seemed likely to prove fatal. Just as the knight had finished, Guy entered. He had heard the news, which had spread like wildfire through the castle. The lad's eyes were red, for he had been greatly attached to Henry, whose constant companion he had been whenever the family had been at their English home. "It is a strange fate, lad," Sir Eustace said, laying his hands upon Guy's shoulder. "You, who have exposed yourself freely, for I marked you in the fight, have come through scatheless, while Henry, whom I thought to keep out of danger, has fallen. And what is your news?" "There have been 17 killed, my lord, besides Jean Bouvard, who was struck in the face by one of the last crossbow bolts shot before they drew off." "This is bad news indeed. I wonder why he came not to me as soon as we had beaten them off, but I thought not of this. He was a good and trustworthy fellow, and I shall miss him sorely. 17, say you? It is too many, and yet there might have been more. Who are they?" "4 of our archers, Sir Eustace, 1 of our English men-at-arms, and 6 of your French men-at-arms. These were all killed by crossbow bolts and arrows. 2 of your tenants, Pierre Leroy and Jules Beaune, and 4 of their men fell on the wall when the French gained a footing there. 3 were, I hear, unmarried men. The other has left a wife and 3 children." "They shall be my care," the knight said. "The wives of Leroy and Beaune shall hold their farms free of dues until their eldest sons come of age." "Does all seem quiet without?" "All is quiet, my lord, but as I left the wall but now a knight with a white flag and 4 torch bearers was coming down the slope towards the outwork." "I will go there myself," Sir Eustace said. "'Tis likely they do but come to ask for leave to carry off the dead and wounded, which we will gladly let them do, for it will save us much trouble tomorrow." It was as Sir Eustace had supposed, and he at once gave the permission asked for, and in a short time a great number of men with torches came down the slope, and for the next 2 hours were occupied in carrying off their dead and wounded comrades. A close watch was maintained all night, though there was small fear of a renewal of the attack. At daybreak the rear guard of the enemy could be seen retiring, and a party of men-at-arms, under Sir Eustace himself, on going out to reconnoitre, found that none had remained behind. A mound marked the place where their dead had been buried in one great grave. Many of the mantlets had been removed, and they doubted not that these had been used as litters for the conveyance of the wounded. They afterwards heard that some 450 men had been killed, and that over 100, too sorely wounded to be able to walk, had been carried away. In the afternoon Henry was buried beneath the chapel in the castle, while the men-at-arms and others were laid in the inner courtyard. Having learned that the Orleanists, greatly disheartened at their heavy repulse, had marched away to the south, the gates of the castle were opened. A small number of the garrison were retained in the castle, and the rest were sent out to aid the tenants in felling trees and getting up temporary shelters near their former homes until these could be rebuilt as before. For the time their wives and families were to remain in the castle. All fear of another attack by the Orleanists speedily passed away. Artois was, upon the whole, strongly Burgundian, and an army marching from Flanders speedily brought the whole province over to that side. Nothing was done towards commencing the work of rebuilding the farmhouses, for it was evident the castle might at any moment be again beleaguered. 2 months passed quietly. Sir Eustace busied himself in seeing that the tenants were comfortably re-established in their temporary homes. The Burgundians had again obtained several advantages, and as Sir Clugnet was known to have marched away with his following to the assistance of the Orleanists, who had of late fared badly, there was no fear of any fresh attack being made upon the castle. One day a messenger rode in from the governor of Calais, who was personally known to Sir Eustace. The letter that he carried was an important one. After the usual greeting, it read: "For the love I bear you, Sir Eustace, I write to let you know that there is a change in affairs. It seems that the Duke of Burgundy has but been playing with our King Henry, and that the offer of a marriage was made only in order to obtain assistance and the countenance of the king. Being now, as it would seem, powerful enough to hold his own against his enemies without such aid, the matter has fallen through. I have received a royal order, which has also been sent to the governors of other English towns, and it has been proclaimed everywhere by sound of trumpets, that none of Henry's subjects of whatever rank should in any way interfere between the two factions in France, nor go into France to serve either of them by arms or otherwise under pain of death and confiscation of fortune. But I would tell you for your private ear that I have news that our king is in correspondence with the Dukes of Berri, Orleans, and Bourbon, and that it is like that he will shortly declare for that party, being grievously offended at the treatment that he has received at the hands of the Duke of Burgundy, after having given him loyal help and assistance, which had in no slight degree assisted him in making good his cause against his enemies." So in a short time indeed the English from Calais and from other places held by them in France began to make sorties and to carry off much plunder from the country round, and especially took by storm the castle of Banelinghen near Ardres, notwithstanding the truce that prevailed. The intentions of the King of England were made still more manifest by his writing a letter to the Flemish towns, saying that, having heard that the Duke of Burgundy was gathering an army of Flemings to march into Aquitaine to wage war upon and destroy his subjects, and particularly his very dear and well beloved cousins, the Dukes of Berri, Orleans, and Bourbon, and the Counts of Alençon and Armagnac, and the Lord d'Albreth, he therefore begged them to inform him whether they were willing to conform to the truce concluded between them and England, without in any way assisting their lord in his wicked purpose. The Flemish towns replied that they desired in no way to infringe the truce between the two countries, but that they would serve and assist the King of France, their sovereign lord, and their Count, the Duke of Burgundy, as heretofore, to the utmost of their power. In a short time, indeed, it became known that a solemn treaty had been concluded between the King of England and the Orleanist nobles, they engaging to aid him to recover Gien and the parts of Aquitaine that he had lost, while he promised to put an army in the field to assist them. The position of Sir Eustace was now very difficult. It was uncertain when the English would move, and it was likely enough that if an army set sail it would land in Gien, and that Calais would be able to render no assistance, so that he would be exposed to the attacks of the Burgundians. Nor was his position improved when he learned that on the 15th of July the two French factions, urged by the Count of Savoy, the Grand Master of Rhodes, and many others, had agreed to terms of peace between them, and that the Orleanists had formally renounced the English alliance. At the meeting of the leaders of the party, the Duke of Aquitaine, the king's son, presided. For a time all the differences were patched up. The news, however, came too late to arrest the embarkation of the English. 8,000 men landed at La Hogue under the Duke of Clarence, overran a wide extent of country, being reinforced by 800 Gascons, who had, according to the agreement with the Orleanists, been raised to join them. They advanced towards Paris, declaring, however, that they would retire if the Duke of Berri and his party kept their engagement with them, and paid them the 200,000 crowns he had agreed to do. The Duke had not, however, the means to pay this amount, and the English therefore continued to ravage the country, while a large force from Calais, under the Earl of Warwick, captured the town of Saumer-Bois and the castle of Huisseau. This, however, was scarcely an invasion, and Sir Eustace, being doubtful whether Henry meditated operations upon a large scale, now that he had no longer allies in France, took no part in the matter, but remained quietly in his castle. Towards the end of March, 1413, a royal herald appeared before the gate. He was at once admitted, and was received with all honour in the great hall by Sir Eustace. "Sir Eustace de Villeroy," said the royal herald, "I come to you in the name of the King of France, your lord and suzerain. He bids me to say that he has heard with satisfaction that you refused entry to your castle to those who demanded it altogether without authority from him, but that, seeing the importance of the castle in case of trouble with England, and that you are a vassal of England for estates in that country, he deems it necessary that its safety should be assured, and therefore calls upon you to send, in proof of your loyalty to and affection for him, your wife and children to Paris, where they shall be cared for in all honour and as becomes their condition, or to receive a garrison of royal troops of such strength as to defend the castle from any fresh assault that may be made upon it, either on the part of those who before attacked it, or of England. He charges you on your fealty to accept one or the other of these conditions, or to be deemed a false vassal, which he cannot believe you are, knowing you to be a brave and worthy knight. Here is a document with the king's signature and seal to the effect which I have delivered to you." "His Majesty's demands come upon me as a surprise," the knight said gravely, "and I pray you to abide with me till tomorrow, by which time I shall have had leisure to consider the alternatives and be ready to give you answer." "Your request is a reasonable one, Sir Eustace," the herald replied, "and I will await the answer for 24 hours." The herald was then conducted to the guest chamber, and Sir Eustace went out into the courtyard, and for some time busied himself with the usual affairs of his estate, and talked to the tenants as to their plans. Then he went up on to the wall, and there paced moodily backwards and forwards, thinking over the summons that he had received. He knew that Margaret had been in the gallery in the hall, and had heard the message the herald had delivered, and he wished to think it well over before seeing her. His position was, he felt, a perilous one. The last treaty of peace between France and England had drawn the frontier line more straightly in. After Crécy was fought but a few miles away, Villeroy had stood within the English line as far as it now stood without it. That Henry, who, although now old and averse to war, must yet ere long again renew the war that had so long languished, he had little doubt, but he had no hope of succour at present, and felt that though able to withstand any sudden attack like that he had recently repulsed, he could not hope to make a successful defence against a great force provided with battering machines. The message from the king was indeed but a message from Burgundy, but if Burgundy was all powerful just at present, it had the same effect as if it were the king and not he who had sent the summons. He could see no way of temporizing save that Margaret and the children should go as hostages, and the idea of this was wholly repugnant to him. Were he to admit a French garrison, the castle would be virtually lost to him, for once powerless he could easily be set aside in favour of one of Burgundy's followers. The only alternative then seemed to be that he should altogether forsake the castle and estate so long held by his ancestors, and retire to England, until, maybe, some day Henry might again place him in possession of it. He regretted now that he had not told Margaret that she had best keep her chamber, for she then would have known nothing of the alternative that she should go as a hostage, an alternative he foresaw that she was likely to favour, as by so doing the necessity for making an absolute decision in choosing between France and England would be postponed. At length, still undecided in his mind, he descended from the wall and went up to his wife's apartments. Chapter 5. Hostages. Margaret rose to meet her husband when he entered. She had looked pale in her dress of deep mourning before, but he thought that she looked paler now. She too had evidently been thinking over the summons that he had received, and there was an expression of firmness and resolution in her face that seemed to say that she had arrived at a more definite conclusion than he had done. "'Tis a knotty question, wife," Sir Eustace said. "In the first place, it is clear we cannot hope to defend the castle successfully against an attack by Burgundy. The last was but of the character of a raid. The next would be a serious siege by experienced soldiers provided with all proper means and appliances. Before, it was certain that Sir Clugnet would, if he tarried here, be shortly attacked by the Burgundians, whereas now there would be no prospect of assistance. There is no hope of help from England, for there is no force in Calais that could contend with that which would probably be sent against me. Therefore I take it that if attacked the castle must in the end fall, in which case probably its defenders would all be put to the sword. I myself should most certainly be killed, the estates forfeited, and you and the children taken prisoners to Paris. Now it seems to me that that is not to be thought of. It remains to decide, therefore, whether we shall abandon the castle and journey to England, or whether we will admit a Burgundian garrison, which will, in effect, we may be sure, be the first step towards losing the castle and estate altogether. It seems to me that the first will be the best plan. I see no chance of it at present, but in time Henry may invade France, and as we lie only some 7 or 8 miles from the frontier, he would doubtless recapture Villeroy, and we should again become its masters." "You have not mentioned the other alternative, Eustace, namely, that I and the children should go to Paris as hostages, and this, it seems to me, is the best of the three to follow. If there were indeed a chance of an English invasion I should not say so, but I think not that there is any such prospect. It is many years since England has done aught in earnest, and during all that time her power in France has been waning. I would not that our children should lose this fair estate, when it can well be preserved by some slight sacrifice on my part. Were I and the children to go to Paris, it would put an end to all doubts as to your loyalty, and you would hold the castle and estates. The peace now patched up between the parties will not last, and as soon as they are engaged with each other, and have no time to spare to think of attacking you here, I will endeavour to escape with the children and rejoin you. I shall assuredly have no cause for complaint. I shall, of course, have honourable treatment, and apartments fitting to our rank assigned to me. It would be no great hardship, and even were it so, it would be worth enduring in order that our son Charles should inherit his father's estate." "I could not part from you, love." "Nay, Eustace, as I have said, it cannot be for long, and you must remember that twice when the children were infants I remained in England with them while you were some months here. It would be no worse now. I would take Guy with me. The lad has sense and courage, the children are both fond of him, and I myself could, if occasion arose, take counsel with him. Then I could have 2 or 3 stout men at arms who might ride in my train in peaceful garb as retainers. As to a maid, I can, if I need one, hire her in Paris. Surely, husband, it would be far better so that we should lose castle and land. There could be little danger to one in Paris at any time, still less to the wife of a vassal of the crown, least of all to a hostage. I shall be but staying at the court. If you peril life and limb, Eustace, in defence of your castle, surely it is not much that I should put myself to the slight inconvenience of a stay in Paris for a while." "I like it not," the knight said moodily. "I see well enough that what you say is true, and that you should be safe at Charles's court, indeed safer than here. The citizens of Paris are indeed turbulent, whether they shout for Orleans or Burgundy, but what if Henry of England should again lead an army here?" "But why imagine what is not likely to happen? Long ere Henry comes I may have joined you again. Should it be otherwise, I might perhaps escape, or at the very worst of all they could but keep me in duress in my chamber. Who ever heard of a woman being ill treated for the disobedience of her lord? All that they could do would be to make you pay a ransom for my return." "I would rather go as a hostage myself." "Nay, husband, that could hardly be. Who would then take care of your castle? It is not a hard thing that the king asks, merely that I and the children shall for a time live at his court as a proof that you, his vassal, hold your castle for him. Even if the worst comes to the worst, we can but lose castle and land, as we must lose it now if I do not go. Nay, my dear lord, do not wrinkle your brow. We cannot strive against the might of France, and at present we must bow our heads and wait until the storm is past and hope for better times. There may be an English war ere long. Henry may again extend his frontiers, and you might again become a vassal of England for these possessions of yours, even as your fathers were." "I see that reason is on your side, Margaret, and yet I cannot bring myself to like the plan."
"Nor do I like it, husband, yet I feel that it were 1,000 times better that I should be separated from you for a time than that we should risk another siege. The last has cost us dear enough, another might take you from me."
"Well, well, dear, I suppose you must have your way. Indeed, I do not see that harm can possibly come to you, and it will at any rate ensure peace for a time, and enable us to repair our tenants' losses. I shall send over a message at once to Sir Aylmer, and beg him to choose and send me another 50 archers with that reinforcement I could make head against any attack, save in the greatest force, for there is no saying how things may go. The 25 did wonders, and with thrice that force I should feel confident that Villeroy could withstand any attack, save by an army with an abundance of great machines. Well, Margaret, since you have decided for me that you are to go, and indeed I myself plainly see that that alternative is really the best, let us talk over who you had best take with you. I quite approve of your choice of Guy. He is a good lad, and will make a brave knight some day.
I shall now make him one of my esquires, and as such he will always be in attendance on you, and assuredly Agnes and Charlie will, as well as yourself, benefit by his presence. He will be able to take them out and look after them. As he talks French as well as English, the lad will be useful to you in many ways. Have you any preference as to the 4 men-at-arms? Could you spare Tom, the leader of the archers? I should like to have another Englishman with me, and he is very good-tempered and obliging. He is shrewd too, and with his strength and courage I should feel that I could wholly rely upon him in any strait, though indeed I see not that there is any probability of such occurring. Certainly you can have him, Margaret, and I shall be glad to know that he is with you. Dickon, who is next under him, can act as captain of the archers while he is away. I have noticed that Tom is picking up the language fast. He is always ready to do little kindnesses to the women and children, and I have often heard him talking with them. He will soon get to speak the language fairly. As to the others, have you any choice? No, I think you had better choose them for me, Eustace. They had better be French, he said. It would not do for you to surround yourself entirely by English, although of course it is natural enough that you should have an English squire and servant. I think that you could not do better than to take Jules Varret and Albert Pongard. They are both stout men-at-arms, prudent fellows, and not given to the wine-cup. As a fourth, I would say Jean Picard's son. He is a stout fellow too, and I know that but for his father's hopes that he will one day succeed him as butler, he would have taken service regularly as a man-at-arms. He fought stoutly when the French gained the wall, and I marked him engaging blows with Sir Clugnet himself, and bearing himself as well as any man there. You could choose no better. So be it, she said. I think, Eustace, that with 4 such defenders, to say nothing of young Guy, you need not feel uneasy about us. I don't think that I should feel uneasy, Margaret, but I know that I can ill spare you. You have ever been at my side since we were married, save when, after the births of Agnes and Charles, you were forced to stay in England when I came over here. I felt it a dreary time then, and shall feel it so now, but I doubt not that all will go well with you, though it will be a very different life to that to which you have been accustomed. I shall do well enough, Margaret said cheerfully, and maybe I shall get so fond of court that you will have to take me to that of Henry when we return to England. Now you had best begin to make your preparations. I will speak to Guy and the others myself. Sir Eustace went into the courtyard, where Guy was superintending the issue of provisions to the women. This can go on without you, he said. Gervaise will see to it. I would speak to you. You were at the meeting this morning, Guy, and you heard what the Herald of France said. The position is a hard one. I cannot hold the castle against the strength of France, while if we take a Burgundian garrison I should cease to be its master, and it would doubtless soon pass into other hands. Again, if I go to England it would equally be lost to us. Therefore my wife has resolved, in order to gain time until these disorders are over, to go to Paris with the children as a hostage for me. In no case, as it seems to me, are Dame Margaret and the children likely to be in danger. Nevertheless, I am greatly loath for them to go. However, seeing no other way out of the business, I have consented, and we have arranged that you shall accompany her. You will go as my esquire, and I shall install you as such this afternoon. You will take Long Tom, 2 of the men-at-arms, and Robert Picard, all good men and true, but at the same time the burden and responsibility must rest upon your shoulders. You are young yet for so grave a charge, and yet I feel I can confide it to you. You will have to be the stay and support of your mistress, you will have to be the companion and friend of my children, and I shall charge the 4 men-at-arms to take orders from you as from me. Tom will be a valuable fellow. In the first place, he is, I know, much attached to you, besides being shrewd, and a very giant in strength. The other 3 are all honest varlets, and you can rely upon them in any pinch. "I will do my best, my lord," Guy said quietly, "and I am grateful to you indeed for the confidence that you show in me, and I shall, I hope, prove worthy of it and of my father." The news soon spread through the castle that Dame Margaret was going to Paris. The maids wept at the thought, as did many of the tenants' wives, for since the siege began her kindness and the pains that she had taken to make them comfortable had endeared her greatly to them. On her previous visits they had seen comparatively little of her. She had been to them simply their lord's English wife. Now they knew her as a friend. Nevertheless, their regret at her leaving was softened by the thought that her going to be near the king ensured peace for them,
and that they would now be able to venture out of the houses that were fast rising on the ruins of their former homes, and to take up their life again as they had left it. Early next morning the little cortege mustered in the courtyard in readiness for a start. Sir Eustace and his wife had said goodbye to each other in their chamber, and she looked calm and tranquil as she mounted her horse, for having been accustomed from a child to ride with her father, hunting and hawking, she could sit a horse well, and scorned to ride, as did so many ladies, on a pillion. Guy rode by her side, with Agnes on a pillion behind him. Long Tom, with Charlie perched in front of him, followed them, and the three men-at-arms brought up the rear. Charlie was in high spirits. He regarded the trip as a sort of holiday, and had been talking ever since he got up of the wonders that he would see in Paris. Agnes better understood the situation, and nothing but the feeling that she ought to emulate the calmness of her mother restrained her from bursting into tears when her father lifted her onto her seat. The herald led the way, followed by his two pursuivants. Dame Margaret checked her horse in the middle of the courtyard, and said in a loud clear voice to the tenants and the men-at-arms around, "Adieu, good friends. I trust that I shall not be long away from you. I go to stay for a time at the court in Paris, and I leave you with the surety that you will have peace and rest until I return, and be able to repair the damages you suffered from the attack made upon us by men who regard not the law." She turned and waved her hand to Sir Eustace, who was standing immovable on the steps, and then, touching the horse with her heel, they moved on after the herald. "Do not fear to speak, Tom," Dame Margaret said, after they had left the castle behind them. "The journey is a long one, and it will go all the quicker for honest talk. What think you of this expedition to Paris?" "I would as lief go there as anywhere else, my lady. Indeed, men say that it is a fine city, and as I have never seen a bigger town than Southampton, I doubt not that I shall find plenty to interest me at times when you may not require our services." "I see that you have brought your bow with you." "Ay, my lady, I could not bring myself to part with it. Sir Eustace told me that I could not carry it, as its length would be a matter of remark, and point me out at once as being an Englishman, seeing that the French archers carry no bows of such length. So I have, even as you see, wrapped it round with straw, and fastened it to the saddle beneath my leg. I have also put 80 arrows among the valises on the pack horses."
"There is no chance of your needing them, Tom."
"I trust that is so," the archer replied, "but indeed there is never any saying, and an archer without his bow is but a poor creature, though indeed I trust that I can swing an axe as well as another."
"And much better than most, Tom. Still, I hope that neither axe nor bow will be required."
"To that I say amen also, for although a fray may sometimes be to my taste, I have no desire to be mixed up in a mêlée without some of my own stout comrades with me."
"Shall we get to Paris tonight, Lady Mother?" Charles asked. "No, indeed, it will be 5 days, if not 6, for I see by the way that we are travelling we are bearing east, and shall sleep at Lille, or maybe at Tournay. Then doubtless we shall bear south, and may stop the next night at Cambrai, and make to Noyon the following day, and thence to Compiègne or to Senlis, and the next day will take us to Paris. It all depends how far and how fast we ride each day, but these matters will be arranged by the herald. Were we to go by the shortest route we should get there more quickly, but Amiens is held by the party to whom the men who attacked our castle belong, and by the way we are travelling we shall keep for some time in Artois, and so escape all risk of trouble on the road." "I don't care for trouble," Charlie said stoutly. "We have got Long Tom and Robert Picard and the other two, and Guy can fight also." "That would be all very well, my son," his mother said smiling, "if we were only attacked by half a dozen vagrants, but brave as they all are, they could do naught if a large body surprised us. But be assured that there is no fear of that. By the way we are travelling we shall meet with none but friends." "I should like to be attacked by the vagrants, mother. The last time you made us stay with you when there was fighting going on, except just at the first, but here we should see it all." "Well, I don't want to see it, Charlie, and I am glad we are not likely to do so, and you must remember that you and I and Agnes would sorely hamper our friends." Nevertheless, whenever a party of peasants was met upon the road, Charlie looked out hopefully, and heaved a sigh of disappointment when, after doffing their caps in respect, they passed on quietly. Several times they encountered bodies of knights and men at arms, but the presence of the royal herald saved them from all question. At each halting place Dame Margaret, her children and maid were lodged in the house of one of the principal citizens, while Guy and the men at arms lay at an inn. The troubled state of the times was only manifest by the number of men at arms in the streets, and the strict watch kept at the gates of the towns. Many of these were kept shut, and were only opened once an hour to let people pass in and out. This, however, did not affect the travellers, for the gates were opened the moment the emblazonings on the surcoat of the herald could be made out. "We have assuredly nothing to complain of so far, Guy," Dame Margaret said, as they set out on their last day's journey. "Had we been the king's special guests we could not have been more honourably treated, and I have no doubt that although we shall be much less important personages at Paris than as travellers under the royal protection, we shall yet be made comfortable enough, and shall have naught to grieve over save the separation from our lord." "I cannot doubt that it will be so, lady," Guy replied, "and that at any rate there will be no trouble, unless the Armagnacs lay siege to Paris, or there are riots in the city. I heard last night at the inn from some travellers who have just left it that although the majority of the people there are in favour of Burgundy, yet that much discontent exists on account of the harsh measures of the officers he has appointed, and especially of the conduct of the guild of butchers, who, as it seems, are high in favour with the duke, and rule the city as if it belonged to them." "It matters little to us, Guy, though it seems strange that the nobles of France and the respectable citizens of Paris should allow themselves to be ruled over by such a scum as that. But it was the same in Flanders, where Von Artevelde, our ally, a great man and the chief among them, was murdered by the butchers who at the time held sway in Ghent, and who were conspicuous for many years in all the tumults in the great towns there." "I hear, madam, that the king is ill and can see no one." "Yes, I have heard the same from the herald. It will be John of Burgundy who will for the time be our master." "I could desire a better," Guy said bluntly, "but we shall at any rate know that his fair words are not to be trusted. For my part, however, I wonder that after the Duke of Orleans, with whom he had sworn a solemn peace, any man should hold converse with him." "Unfortunately, Guy, men's interests count for more than their feelings, and a great noble who has it in his power to grant favours and dispense honours will find adherents though he has waded through blood. Burgundy, too, as I hear, has winning manners and a soft tongue, and can, when it pleases him, play the part of a frank and honest man. At least it must be owned that the title of fearless does not misbecome him, for had it been otherwise he would have denied all part in the murder of Orleans, instead of openly avowing that it was done by his orders." They had started at an earlier hour than usual that morning, as the herald had pointed out to Dame Margaret that it were best to arrive in Paris as early as possible, in order that the question of their lodging might be settled at once. Accordingly they had been up at daybreak and arrived in Paris at noon. "How long will it be, I wonder," Dame Margaret said as they rode through the gates, "before we shall pass through here again?" "Not very long, I hope, my lady," Guy said, "but be sure that if at any time you wish to leave we shall be able to procure disguises for you all, and to make our way out without difficulty." "Nay, Guy, you forget that it is only so long as we are here that Villeroy is safe from attack. Whatever happens, nothing save the news that an English army has landed at Calais and is about to invade France would leave me free to attempt an escape. If not released before that, I must then at all hazards try to escape, for Sir Eustace, knowing that I am here, would be placed in a sore strait indeed, both by his own inclinations and as a vassal of England, for he would want to join the English as soon as they advanced, and yet would be hindered by the knowledge that I was a hostage here. It would be for me to relieve him of that fear, and the same feeling that induced me to come hither would then take me back to Villeroy." "Then, madam, I fear that our stay here will be a long one, for Henry has never pushed on the war with France vigorously, and though plenty of cause has been given by the capture of his castles in Guienne, he has never drawn sword either to regain them or to avenge the insults put upon the English flag." "King Henry is old, Guy, and they say that his son is as full of spirit and as fiery as his father is peaceful and indisposed for war. When the king dies, my lord thinks that it will be but a short time before the English banner will be unfurled in France, and this is one of the reasons why he consented to my becoming a hostage, thinking that no long time is likely to elapse before he will have English backing, and will be able to disregard the threats of France."
"How narrow and sombre are these streets," Guy said after a pause. "One seems to draw one's breath with difficulty."
"Ay, they are well nigh as narrow in London," his mistress replied, "but they are gay enough below. See how crowded they are, and how brilliant are some of the costumes."
"Some of them indeed, madam, but more are poor and miserable; and as to the faces, they are so scowling and sombre. Truly, were we not on horseback, I would keep my hand tight upon my pouch, though in truth there is nothing in it worth stealing." "Ay, ay, Master Guy," Long Tom broke in, "methinks that there are a good many heads among these scowling knaves that I would gladly have a chance of cracking, had I my quarter staff in my hand and half a dozen stout fellows here with me. See how insolently they stare."
"Hush, Tom," Dame Margaret said, turning round. "If you talk of cracking skulls, I shall regret that I brought you with me."
"I am not thinking of doing it, my lady," the archer said apologetically. "I did but say that I should like to do it, and between liking and doing there is often a long distance."
"Sometimes, Tom, but one often leads to the other. You must remember that above all things it behoves us to act prudently here, and to avoid drawing the attention of our foes. We English are not loved in Paris, and the less you open your mouth here the better, for when Burgundians and Armagnacs are ready to cut each other's throats over a name, fellow countrymen though they be, neither would feel any compunction about killing an Englishman." After riding for half an hour they entered the courtyard of a large building, where men at arms and varlets wearing the cognizance of Burgundy were moving around. A group of nobles were standing on the steps, while some grooms were walking their horses round the courtyard. The herald made his way to the door, where all alighted. "Whom have we here, I wonder?" one of the young nobles said to another as they came up. "A royal herald and his pursuivants, a young dame and a very fair one, a daughter, I suppose, also fair, the lady's esquire, and a small boy." "Hostages, I should say," the other replied, "for the good conduct of the lady's lord, whoever he may be. I know her not, and think that she cannot have been at court for the last 10 years, for I could hardly have forgotten her face." Dame Margaret took the hands of her two children and followed the herald up the steps. She had made a motion of her head to Guy to attend her, and he accordingly followed behind. "A haughty lady as well as a fair one," the young knight laughed. "She did not so much as glance at us, but held her head as high as if she were going in to rate Burgundy himself. I think that she must be English by her looks, though what an English woman can be doing here in Paris is beyond my understanding, unless it be that she is the wife of a knight of Guienne. In that case she would more likely be with Orleans than here." "Yes, but you see the herald has brought her. It may be her lord's castle has been captured, and she has come under the safe conduct of a herald to lay a complaint. But I think with you that she is English. The girl was fair too, though not so fair as her mother, and that curly headed young esquire is of English stock too. He is a stout looking fellow, De Maupas, and will make a powerful man. He looks as if he could strike a shrewd blow even now. Let us question their knaves, one of whom, by the way, is a veritable giant at point of height." He beckoned to the four men, and Robert Picard came forward. "Who is your lady, young man?" "Dame Margaret de Villeroy, may it please you, sir. She is the wife of Sir Eustace de Villeroy." "Then we were right, De Maupas, for De Villeroy is, I know, a vassal of England for his wife's estates, and his people have always counted themselves English, because for over 100 years their castle stood inside the English line." "He is a stout knight. We heard a month ago how bravely he held his castle against Sir Clugnet de Brabant, with 8,000 Orleanists, and beat him off with a loss of 5 knights and 400 men. Sir Clugnet himself was sorely wounded. We all ought to feel mightily obliged to him for the check which sent them back post haste out of Artois, where they had already done damage enough, and might have done more had they not been so roughly handled. I wonder what the lady is here for?" "It may be that he would have fought the Burgundians as stoutly as he fought the Armagnacs," the other said, "and that the duke does not care about having so strong a castle held by so stout a knight within a few miles of the English line." The other shrugged his shoulders. "The English are sleeping dogs," he said. "There is no Edward and no Black Prince to lead them now." "No, but you must remember that sleeping dogs wake up sometimes, and even try to bite when they do so. Moreover, we know of old that these particular dogs can bite hard." "The sooner they wake up the better, I say, De Maupas.
We have a long grudge to wipe off against them, and our men are not likely to repeat the mistakes that cost us so dearly before. Besides, the English have had no real fighting for years, and it seems to me that they have altogether given up any hope of extending their possessions in France." "One can never tell, De Revel. For my part, I own that I care not that they should again spread their banner on this side of the sea. There can be no doubt that they are stout fighting men, and seeing how France is divided, they might do sore damage did they throw their weight into one side of the scale." "Methinks there is no fear of that. The dukes both know well enough that their own followers would not fight side by side with the English, and though they might propose an alliance with the islanders, it would only be for the purpose of bringing the war to a close by uniting both parties against our old enemy." In the meantime Dame Margaret had followed her conductor to the great chamber, where John of Burgundy held audience in almost royal state. Several nobles were gathered round him, but at the entrance of the herald these fell back, leaving him standing by himself. An eminently politic man, the duke saw at once by the upright figure and the fearless air with which Dame Margaret entered the hall that this was a case where courtesy and deference were far more likely to bring about the desired end of winning her husband over to his interests than any menaces or rough speaking. He therefore advanced 2 or 3 steps to meet her. "My lord duke," the herald said, "this lady, Dame Margaret of Villeroy, has journeyed hither with me in accordance with the wish expressed by his majesty the king." "As the king's representative in Paris, lady," the duke said to Margaret, "I thank you for your promptness in thus conceding to his wish." "His majesty's wish was naturally a command to me, Sir Duke," Margaret said with quiet dignity. "We, my husband and I, understood that some enemy had been influencing his majesty's mind against my lord, and in order to assure him of my lord's loyalty as a faithful vassal for the land he holds, I have willingly journeyed here with my children, although in much grief for the loss of my eldest son, who died in the attack lately made upon our castle by a large body of men, of whom we knew naught, save that they did not come in the name of our lord the king." "I have heard of the attack, lady, and of the gallant and successful defence made by Sir Eustace, and the king was greatly pleased to hear of the heavy check thus inflicted upon the men who had raised the banner of revolt and were harassing his majesty's faithful subjects." "That being so, my lord duke," Margaret said, "'tis strange, after my lord had shown how ready and well prepared he was to protect his castle against ill doers, that he should have been asked to admit a garrison of strangers to aid him to hold it. Sir Eustace has no desire to meddle with the troubles of the times. He holds his castle as a fief directly from the crown, as his ancestors have held it for 200 years. He wishes only to dwell in peace and in loyal service to the king." "Such we have always understood, madam, and gladly would the king have seen Sir Eustace himself at his court. The king will, I trust, shortly be recovered from his malady. Until he is so, I have, for I was made acquainted with your coming by messenger sent forward by Monjoie, arranged for you to be lodged in all honour at the house of Master Leroux, one of the most worshipful of the citizens of Paris, and provost of the guild of silversmiths. My chamberlain will at once conduct you thither." "I thank you, my lord," Margaret said with stately reverence, "and trust that when I am received by my lord the king I shall be able to prove to him that Sir Eustace is his faithful vassal, and can be trusted to hold his castle for him against all comers." "I doubt it not, lady," the duke said courteously. "Sir Victor Pierrepoint, I pray you to see this lady to the entrance. Sir Hugo will already be waiting her there." Chapter 6. In Paris. "A bold dame and a fair one," John of Burgundy said to the gentlemen round him when Margaret left the chamber. "Methinks that she would be able to hold Villeroy even should Sir Eustace be away." "That would she," one of the knights said with a laugh. "I doubt not that she would buckle on armour if need were, but we must make some allowance for her heat. It is no pleasant thing to be taken away from her castle and brought hither as a hostage, to be held for how long a time she knows not." "It was the safest way of securing the castle," the duke said. "Can one doubt that with her by his side her husband would open his gates to the English should they appear before it? He himself is a vassal both of England and France, and should the balance be placed before him, there can be little doubt that her weight would incline him to England. How well these English women keep their youth! One might believe her to be but a few years past 20, and yet she is the mother of that girl who is well nigh as tall as herself." "And who bids to be as fair, my Lord Duke?" "And as English, de Porcelet. She would be a difficult eaglet to tame, if I mistake not, and had she been the spokeswoman, methinks she would have answered as haughtily as did her mother. But it might be no bad plan to mate her to a Frenchman. It is true that there is the boy, but the fief might well be bestowed upon her if so mated, on the ground that the boy would likely take after his father and mother, and hold Villeroy for England rather than for France. However, she is young yet. In a couple of years, de Porcelet, it will be time for you to urge your suit, if so inclined." There was a general smile from the circle standing round, but the young knight said gravely, "When the time comes, my Lord Duke, I may remind you of what you have said. 'Tis a fair young face, honest and good, though at present she must naturally feel with her mother at being thus haled away from home." Sir Victor escorted Margaret to the courtyard. As they appeared at the entrance, a knight came up and saluted her. "I am entrusted by the Duke with the honour of escorting you to your lodgings," he said. "I am Hugo de Chamfort, the Duke's chamberlain." After assisting her into the saddle, he mounted a horse which an attendant brought up, and placed himself by her side. Two men at arms with their surtouts embroidered with the cognizance of Burgundy led the way, and the rest of the party followed in the same order in which they had come. The distance was short, and beyond a few questions by the knight as to the journey, and how she had been cared for on the way, and Margaret's replies, little was said until they reached the house of the provost of the silversmiths. As they rode up to the door, Maître Leroux himself came out from the house. "Welcome, lady," he said, "to my abode. My wife will do all that she can to make you comfortable." "I am sorry indeed, good sir," Margaret said, "to be thus forced upon your hospitality, and regret the trouble that my stay will impose upon you." "Say not so, lady. We deem it an honour that his grace the Duke of Burgundy should have selected us for the honour of entertaining you. The house is large, and we have no family. Chambers are already prepared for yourself, your daughter and son, while there are others at your disposal for your following." "I would not trespass too much upon you," she said. "My daughter can sleep with me, and I am sure that my esquire here, Master Guy Aylmer, will gladly share a room with my boy. I can obtain lodgings for my 4 followers without." "You will grieve me much if you propose it, lady. There is a large room upstairs unoccupied, and I will place pallets for them there, and as for their meals, they can have them apart." By this time they had mounted a fine flight of stairs, at the top of which Dame Leroux was standing to receive her guests. She was a kindly looking woman, between 30 and 40 years of age. "Welcome, Lord Margaret," she said with a cordiality that made Margaret feel at once that her visit was not regarded as an infliction. "We are quiet people, but will do our best to render your stay here a pleasant one." "Thanks indeed, mistress," Margaret replied. "I fear much that my presence would be felt as a burden, and had hardly hoped for so kind a welcome. This is my daughter Agnes, and my son Charles." Then she turned to Sir Hugo. "I pray you to give my thanks to his grace the Duke of Burgundy, and to thank him for having so well bestowed me. I thank you also for your courtesy for having conducted me here." "I will convey your message to the duke," he said, "who will, I am sure, be pleased to hear of your contentment." Maître Leroux accompanied the knight downstairs again, and when he had mounted and ridden off he called 2 servitors, and bade one carry the luggage upstairs, and the other conduct the men to the stables he had taken for the horses. "After you have seen to their comfort," he said to Robert Picard, "you will return hither. You will find a meal prepared for you, and will be bestowed together in a chamber upstairs." In the meantime his wife had ushered Dame Margaret into a very handsomely furnished apartment. "This is at your entire service, Lady Margaret," she said. "The bedroom behind it is for yourself, the one next to it for your daughter, unless you would prefer that she should sleep with you." "I thank you. I was telling your husband that I should prefer that, and my son and esquire can therefore occupy the second room. But I fear greatly that I am disturbing yourself and your husband." "No, indeed. Our sitting room and bedroom are on the other side of the landing. These are our regular guest chambers, and your being here will make no change whatever in our arrangements. I only regret that the apartments are not larger." "Do not apologize, I beg of you, madam. I can assure you that the room is far handsomer than that to which I have been accustomed."
You citizens of Paris are far in advance of us in your ideas of comfort and luxury, and the apartments both at Villeroy and in my English home cannot compare with these, except in point of size. I never dreamt that my prison would be so comfortable." "Ah, say not prison, I pray you, lady. I heard, indeed, that your visit to the court was not altogether one of your own choice, but believe me, here at least you will be but a guest, and an honoured and welcome one. I will leave you now. If there is aught that you desire, I pray you to ring that bell on the table. Refreshments will be quickly served. Had I known the precise hour at which you would come, we would of course have been in readiness for you, but I thought not that you would arrive till evening." "I hope that you will give me much of your company, mistress," Margaret said warmly. "We know no one in this great city, and shall be glad indeed if, when you can spare time, you will sit with us." "Well, children, what do you think of this?" she asked when their hostess had left the room. "Oh, it is lovely, mother," Agnes said. "Look at the inlaid cabinets and the couches and tables, and this great warm rug that covers all the floor. How snug and comfortable it all is. Why, mother, I never saw anything like this." "You might have seen something like it had you ever been in the house of one of our rich London traders, Agnes. At least so I have heard, though in truth I have never myself been in so luxuriously furnished a room. I only hope that we may stay here for some time. The best of it is that these good people evidently do not regard us as a burden. No doubt they are pleased to oblige the Duke of Burgundy, but beyond that their welcome seems really sincere. Now let us see our bedroom. I suppose that it is yours, Charlie, through the door in the corner." The valises had already been brought to the rooms by another entrance, and Margaret and her daughter were charmed with their bedroom. A large ewer and basin of silver stood on a table which was covered with a white cloth. Snowy towels hung beside it. The hangings of the bed were of damask silk, and the floor was almost covered by an Eastern carpet. An exquisitely carved wardrobe stood in one corner. "It is all lovely," Agnes said, clapping her hands. "You ought to have your room at home fitted up like this, mother." "It would take a large slice out of a year's revenue," her mother said with a smile, "to furnish a room in this fashion. The wardrobe alone is worth a knight's ransom, and the ewer and basin are fit for a king. I would that your father could see us here. It would ease his anxiety about us. I must ask how I can best dispatch a messenger to him." When they returned to the other apartment they found the table already laid, and in a short time a dainty repast was served. To this Guy sat down with them, for except when they were guests, when his place was behind his lord's chair, he had always been treated as one of the family, and as the son of Sir Aylmer rather than as a page. "Well, Master Guy, what think you of affairs?" "They seem well to the eye, mistress, but I would not trust that Duke of Burgundy for an hour. With that long face of his and the hooked nose and his crafty look, he resembles little a noble of France. He has an evil face, and one which accords well with the foul murder of the king's brother. However, as I see not that he has aught to gain by holding you here, save that he thinks it will ensure our lord's keeping his castle for him, there is no reason why he should not continue to treat you honourably and courteously. We have yet to learn whether Master Leroux is one of his party, or whether he is in favour of Armagnac." "Oh, I should think he cannot be for Armagnac," she said, "or Duke John would hardly have quartered us upon him. No doubt it was done under the semblance of goodwill, but most men would have considered it a heavy tax, even though, as I expect, we shall not remain here long. Doubtless, however, the trader considers that his complaisance in the matter would be taken by the duke as a sign of his desire to show that at least he is not hostile to him." When they rose from the table, Guy, at his mistress's suggestion, went below and found the four men sitting in the great kitchen, where they had just finished an ample meal. "You have seen to the horses, Robert?" "Yes, Master Guy, they are comfortably bestowed, with an abundance of provender." "I am going out to see how matters stand in the town. Our lady says that at all times two of you must remain here, as it may be necessary to send messages, or should she wish to go out, to escort her; but the other two can be out and about as they please, after first inquiring of me whether there is aught for them to do. You can arrange among yourselves which shall stay in and take turns off duty. Tom, you had better not go out till after dark. There is something in the cut of your garments which tells that you are not French. Robert will go out with me now and find a clothier, and bid him send garments here for you to choose from, or if he has none to fit, which may likely enough be, send him to measure you. It might lead to broils and troubles were any of the rabble to notice that you are a stranger." "That's right enough, Master Guy, and in sooth I have no desire to go out at present, for after riding for the last 6 days I am well content to sit quiet and take my ease here."
Guy then started with Robert Picard. Except in the streets, where the principal merchants dwelt, the town struck him as gloomy and sombre. The palaces of the nobles were veritable fortresses, the streets were ill paved and evil smelling, and the people in the poorer quarters had a sinister aspect. "I should not care to wander about in this district after nightfall, Robert," Guy said to the man at arms, who kept close to his elbow. "Nor I," the man growled. "It's as much as I can do to keep my hands off my dagger now, for methinks that 9 out of 10 of the fellows loitering about would cut our throats willingly if they thought we had but a crown in our pockets."
Presently they found themselves on the quays, and hailing a boat rowed up the river a little beyond the walls. Hearing the sound of music they landed, and on seeing a number of people gather round some booths, they discharged the boat and went on. They found that it was a sort of fair. Here were sword players and mountebanks, pedlars who vended their fares at a lower price than those at which they were sold within the limits of the city, booths at which wine and refreshments could be obtained. Here many soldiers were sitting drinking, watching the passers-by, and exchanging ribald jests with each other, and sometimes addressing observations to the wives and daughters of the citizens, amid fits of laughter at the looks of indignation on the part of their husbands or fathers. "It's evidently a holiday of some sort," Guy remarked, as they found that the fair extended for a considerable distance, and that the crowd was everywhere large. They stopped for a minute or two in front of a booth of more pretensions than the generality. In front of it a man was beating a drum, and a negro walking up and down attired in showy garments. The drum ceased, and the latter shouted, "Those of you who wish to see my master, the famous Elminestres, the most learned doctor in Europe, who can read the stars, cast your horoscope, foretell your future, and cure your ailments, should not lose this opportunity." The curtains opened behind, and a man dressed in dark garments with a long black cloak spotted with silver stars came forward. "You have heard, good people, what my slave has said. He speaks with knowledge. I saved his life in the deserts of Africa, when he was all but dead with fever, by administering to him one of my wonderful potions. He at once recovered and devoted himself to my service. I have infallible remedies for every disease, therefore do you who are sick come to me and be cured, while for you who do not suffer I can do as much or more by telling you of your future, what evils to avoid and what chances to grasp." He stood for a minute silent, his eyes wandering keenly over the spectators. "I see," he said, "one among you who loves a fair maiden standing beside him. At present her parents are unfavourable to his suit, but if he will take my advice he will be able to overcome their objections and to win the damsel. Another I see who has come to Paris with the intention of listing in the service of our good duke, and who, I foresee, will attain rank and honour and become a distinguished soldier, if he does but act prudently at the critical moment, while if he takes a wrong turn, misfortune and death will befall him. I see a youth of gentle blood, who will become a brave knight, and will better his condition by marriage. He has many dangers to go through before that, and has at present a serious charge for one so young, but as he has circumspection as well as courage, he may pass through them unharmed. To him, too, I could give advice that may be valuable, more especially as he is a stranger to the land, as are those of whom he is in charge." "Why, that's wonderful, Master Guy," Robert Picard whispered in Guy's ear in a tone of astonished awe. "The knave doubtless saw us ride in this morning and recognized me again. There is naught of magic in it, but the fellow must be shrewd, or he would not have so quickly drawn his conclusions. I will go in and speak to him presently, for though I believe not his prophecies one jot, a fellow of this sort may be useful. Let us be moving on at present." They passed 2 monks, who were scowling angrily at the man, who was just exciting the laughter of the crowd by asserting that there was a holy man present who usually preferred a flask of good wine to saying his vespers.
"A rose like this should be whipped and branded, brother Anselmo."
"Aye, aye," the other agreed, "and yet," he added slyly, "it may be that he has not yet altogether missed his mark this time. We are not the only 2 monks here," he went on as the other turned upon him angrily, "and it may well be that among them is one who answers to the fellow's lewd description." On the outskirts of the fair were many people of higher degree. Knights and ladies strolled on the turf, exchanging greetings, looking for a minute or two at the gambols of a troop of performing dogs, or at a bout of cudgel play, where two stout fellows belaboured each other heartily and showed sufficient skill to earn from the crowd a shower of small pieces of money, when at last they ceased from pure exhaustion. Half an hour later Guy returned to the booth of the doctor, and went in by a side entrance, to which those who wished to consult the learned man had been directed by the negro. The latter was at the entrance, and, observing that Guy's condition was above that of the majority of his master's clients, at once took him into an inner apartment, divided from the rest of the tent by a hanging. Over the top of this was stretched a black cloth spotted with silver stars, and similar hangings surrounded it. Thus all light was cut off, and the room was dimly illuminated by two lamps. A table with a black cloth stood at the back. On this stood a number of vials and small boxes, together with several retorts and alembics. The doctor was seated on a tripod stool. He rose and was about to address Guy in his usual style, when the latter said, "So you saw us ride in this morning, Master Doctor, and guessed shrewdly as to our condition and nationality. As to the latter, indeed, it needed no sorcery, for it must have been plain to the dullest that my mistress and her daughter were not of French blood, and though I am much less fair, it was a pretty safe guess to suppose that I also was of their country. I need not tell you that I have not come here either for charms nor nostrums, but it seemed to me that, being, as you said, strangers here, we might benefit by the advice of one who, like yourself, notes things quickly, and can form his own conclusions." The doctor removed his tall conical cap and placed it on the table. "You guess rightly," he said with a smile. "I was in the crowd and marked you enter, and a soldier standing next to me observed to a comrade that he had heard that Burgundy had sent the herald to demand the surrender of a castle held by one Sir Eustace, a knight who was known to have friendly leanings towards the English, being a vassal of their king for estates that had come to him with an English wife, and that doubtless this was the lady. When my eye fell on you in the crowd, I said, now here is a youth of shrewdness and parts. He is alone, and he is a foreigner, and maybe I can be of service to him. Therefore I shot my shaft, and, as you see, with success. I said to myself, this youth, being a stranger, will know of no one to whom he can turn for information, and I can furnish him with almost any that he may require. I come in contact with the highest and the lowest, for the Parisians are credulous, and after dark there are some of rank and station who come to my doors for philtres and nostrums, or to have their horoscope cast and their futures predicted. You will ask why one who has such clients should condescend to stand at a booth and talk to this rabble, but it has its purpose. Were I known only as one whom men and women visit in secret, I should soon become suspected of black arts. The priests would raise an outcry against me, and one of these days I might be burned. Here, however, I ostensibly earn my living as a mountebank vendor of drugs and nostrums, and therefore no one troubles his head about me." "There is one thing that you have not told me," Guy said when he ceased speaking. "Having, as you say, good clients besides your gains here, why should you trouble to interest yourself in our affairs?" "Shrewdly put, young man. I will be frank with you. I too am a stranger, and sooner or later I may fall into discredit, and the power of the church be too much for me. When I saw your mistress today, I said to myself, now here is an English lady of rank, with a castle and estate in England. Should I have to fly, and I have one very dear to me, for whose sake I value my life, it might be well for me that I should have one friend in England who would act as protectress for me should aught befall me. Your mistress is a stranger here, and in the hands of enemies. I may be of use to her. I know this population of Paris, and can perhaps give her better information of what's going on, both at the court and in the gutter, than any other man, and may be able to render her assistance when she most needs it, and would ask but in payment that, should I come to England, she will extend her protection to my daughter, until I can find a home and place her there. You see, I am playing an open game with you." "I will reply as frankly," Guy said. "When I came in here, it was, as I told the man at arms, my companion, with the thought that one who had noticed us so shrewdly, and had recognized me so quickly in the crowd, was no ordinary mountebank, but a keen, shrewd man who had some motive for thus addressing me, and I see that my view was a right one. As to your proposal, I can say naught before I have laid it before my mistress, but for myself I may say at once that it recommends itself to me as excellent. We are, as you say, strangers here, and know of no one from whom we might obtain information as to what is going on. My mistress, if not an actual prisoner, is practically so, being held with her children as hostages for my lord's loyalty to France. She is the kindest of ladies, and should she authorize me to enter into future communication with you, you may be sure that she would execute to the full the undertaking you ask for on behalf of your daughter. Where can I see you again? This is scarce a place I could often resort to without my visits being noticed. If, as is likely enough, the Duke of Burgundy may occasionally set spies to inform as to what we are doing, and whether my mistress is in communication with any who are regarded as either doubtful or hostile to his faction. If you will be in front of Notre Dame this evening at 9 o'clock, I will meet you there and conduct you to my abode, where you can visit me free of any fear of observation." "What name shall I call you?" Guy asked. "My name is Montepone. I belong to a noble family of Mantua, but mixing myself up with factions there, I was on the losing side, and unfortunately it happened that in a fray I killed a noble connected with all the ruling families. Sentence of death was passed upon me in my absence, my property was confiscated. Nowhere in Italy should I have been safe from the dagger of the assassin. Therefore I fled to France, and for 10 years have maintained myself by the two arts which so often go together, astrology and buffoonery. I had always been fond of knowledge, and had learned all that could be taught in the grand science of astrology, so that, however much I may gull fools here, I have obtained the confidence of many powerful personages by the accuracy of my forecasts. Had Orleans but believed my solemn assurance, he would not have ridden through the streets of Paris to his death that night, and in other cases where I have been more trusted I have rendered valuable assistance." The belief in astrology had never gained much hold upon the mass of the English people, many as were the superstitions that prevailed among them. Guy had never even given the matter a thought. Montepone, however, evidently believed in his powers of foreseeing the future, and such powers did not in themselves seem altogether impossible to the lad. He therefore made no direct reply, but, saying that he would not fail to be at the appointed place at 9 that evening, took his leave. "Truly, Master Guy, I began to be uneasy about you," Robert Picard said when he rejoined them, "and was meditating whether I had best enter the tent and demand what had become of you. It was only the thought that there might have been others before you, and that you had to wait your turn before seeing him, that restrained me. You have not been taking his nostrums, I trust, for they say that some of those men sell powders by which a man can be changed into a wolf." Guy laughed. "I have taken nothing, Robert, and if I had I should have no fear of such a change happening to me. I have but talked to the man as to how he came to know me, and it is as I thought. He saw us as we entered. He is a shrewd fellow, and may well be of some use to us." "I like not chaffering with men who have intercourse with the devil," Picard said, shaking his head gravely. "Nothing good comes of it. My mother knew a man who bought a powder that was to cure his wife of jealousy, and indeed it did, for it straightway killed her, and he was hung. I think that I can stand up against mortal man as well as another, but my blood ran cold when I saw you enter yon tent, and I fell into a sweat at your long absence." "The man is not of that kind, Robert, so you can reassure yourself. I doubt not that the nostrums he sells are perfectly harmless, and that though they may not cure, they will certainly not kill." They made their way back to the house of the provost of the silversmiths. "Well, what do you think of Paris, Guy?" Dame Margaret asked when he entered. "It is a fine city, no doubt, lady, but in truth I would rather be in the country than in this wilderness of narrow streets. But indeed I have had somewhat of an adventure, and one which I think may prove of advantage." And he then related to his mistress his visit to the booth of the supposed doctor. "Do you think that he is honest, Guy?" she asked when he concluded. "I think so, madam. He spoke honestly enough, and there was a ring of truth in what he said, nor do I see that he could have had any motive for making my acquaintance save what he stated. His story seemed to be a natural one, but I shall be able to judge better when I see him in his own house and with his daughter he speaks of. That is, if your ladyship is willing that I should meet him." "Oh, I am willing enough," she said, "for even if he is a spy of Burgundy's there is nothing that we wish to conceal. I have come here willingly, and have no thought of making my escape, or of mixing myself up in any of the intrigues of the court. Therefore there is no harm that he can do us, while on the other hand you may learn much from him, and will gather in a short time whether he can be trusted. Then by all means go and meet him this evening, but it would be as well to take Tom with you. It does not seem to me at all likely that any plot can be intended, but at any rate it will be well that you should have one with you whom you can thoroughly trust, in case there is any snare set, and to guard you against any lurking cutthroats."
"I will tell him to be of readiness to go with me, madam. It will be his turn to go out with one of the others this evening, and he might not be back in time if I did not warn him." "What arms shall I take with me?" Long Tom asked, when Guy told him of their expedition. "Nothing but your sword and quarterstaff. I see that many of the beggars and others that one meets in the streets carry long staffs, and yours is not much longer than the generality. You brought it tied up with your bow, so you could do well to carry it, for in a street broil, where there is room to swing it, you could desire no better weapon in such strong hands as yours, Tom. Besides, you can knock down and disable with it, and no great harm is done, whereas if you used your sword there would be dead men, and although by all I hear these are not uncommon objects in the streets of Paris, there might be trouble if the town watch came up, and as we are strangers, I shall carry a stout cudgel myself as well as my sword." Accordingly, at 8:30 they set out. Guy put on a long cloak and a cap such as worn by the citizens, but strengthened inside by a few bands of steel forming sufficient protection to the head against any ordinary blow. This he had purchased at a stall on his way home. Tom had put on the garments that had been brought for him that afternoon, consisting of a doublet of tanned leather that could be worn under armour or for ordinary use, and was thick enough to afford considerable protection. The streets were already almost deserted. Those who were abroad hurried along, looking with suspicion at all whom they met, and walking in the middle of the road so as to avoid being taken by surprise by anyone lurking in the doorways or at the corners of alleys. Once or twice men came out and stared at Guy and his companion by the light of the lanterns suspended across the streets, but there was nothing about their appearance to encourage an attack, and the stalwart figure of the archer promised hard blows rather than plunder. Arriving at the square in front of Notre Dame, they waited a while. Here there were still people about, for it was a rendezvous both for roistering young gallants, thieves, and others starting on midnight adventures. After walking backward and forward 2 or 3 times, Guy said, "You had best stand here in the shadow of this buttress while I go and place myself beneath that hanging lamp, seeing that we are together, and he, looking perhaps only for one, may not recognize me." On reaching the lamp, Guy took off his hat so that the light would fall on his face, waited for a minute, and then replaced it. As soon as he did so, a slightly built lad came up to him. "Were you not at the fair by the river today, sir, and are you not expecting someone to meet you here?" "That is so, lad. If you will tell me whom I am expecting, I shall know that he has sent you, though indeed I looked to meet himself and not a messenger." "Montepone," the lad said. "That is right. Why is he not here himself?" "He received a message before starting that one whose orders he could not neglect would call upon him this evening, and he therefore sent me to the rendezvous. I have been looking anxiously for you, but until now had not seen you." "I have a companion with me. Being a stranger here in Paris, I did not care to be wandering through the streets alone. He is a countryman of mine, and can be trusted." "It is indeed dangerous to be out alone. It is seldom that I am in the streets after dark, but the doctor came with me and placed me in a corner of the porch, and then returned by himself, telling me to stir not until I saw you, and that should you not come, or should I not be able to make you out, I was to remain until he came for me, even if I waited until morning." "I will fetch my follower," Guy said, "and am ready to accompany you." The lad was evidently unwilling to be left there for a moment alone, and he walked back with Guy to the buttress where the archer was standing. "This is our guide, Tom," Guy said as the archer stepped out to join him. "The person I expected was unable to come himself. Now, lad, I am ready. You see we are well guarded." The boy nodded, evidently reassured by the bulk of the archer, and was about to step on ahead of them when Guy said, "You had best walk with us. If you keep in front it will seem as if you were guiding us, and that would point us out at once as strangers. Is it far to the place you are taking us to?" "Oh, a short quarter of an hour's walk, sir.